Hey everyone, I'm Clayton Roche. I'm the head of DeFi with Mosendo, and I'm here joined with Nate again from Bancor. I want to say, hey Nate.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah, it's great to have you back. And last time we spoke, we talked a lot about liquidity pools and how that works and what the opportunities were for people investing in DeFi. And one of the things that we talked about was called impermanent loss. And this was basically something of a risk that people had if they were to lock up their Ethereum and their DAI, or in your case, their BNT against another asset. They might experience impermanent loss, which was a certain risk associated with that. And you've just told me that there's been a new development that helps address this concern. So maybe you could start out by explaining what that is.
Yeah, so I guess when you're acting as a liquidity provider to a relay, you can kind of think of three sort of main risks. First, a relay acts where you have to add liquidity to a relay by essentially staking two assets, right? And so risk one is the risk of holding one of the assets that you're staking in this pool. Risk two is the risk that you're holding, the other asset that you've put inside the pool. And then risk three is what you've touched on, is this idea of impermanent loss. And so this is, this kind of big buzzword in the DeFi ecosystem. And this sort of explain it like I'm five version of impermanent loss is that the liquidity pool is always selling the token that is rising in external markets and buying the token that is falling in external markets in price. So impermanent loss actually, really occurs when there's a lot of divergence between the prices of the assets in the pool.
Wow,
Right?
Nate, you're really hanging out with some smart 5-year-olds. I got to meet these kids.
Yeah. And so,
Okay, yeah, carry on.
and so the idea with liquidity pools, the really incentive for liquidity providers, is that there's a fee, a liquidity provider fee, each time the pool processes a transaction. So the real bet you're making is that the fees that you generate from conversions will be greater than any impermanent loss that you suffer, which again is caused by these divergence in the prices of the underlying assets, right?
Sure.
So what we started seeing both in Bancor and in liquidity pools across the industry is that the pools with the highest ROI usually had one stable asset in their reserves. So, if you look on Bancor and Uniswap, you'll see that, ETH and DAI on Uniswap and BNT and DAI on Bancor, these are typically a high ROI pool. And also, similarly, if you look on something like Uniswap, I think now the biggest pool with the highest ROI and the most liquidity providers is synthetic ETH and ETH, right? And so the whole idea, specifically with synthetic ETH and ETH, is that there's very little divergence in those prices. They're essentially tracking each other, right? So as a liquidity provider, you're collecting the fees and you're suffering very minimal impermanent loss. So the first thing Bancor did is we thought, why don't we stick a stable asset in every liquidity pool? So first, you're minimizing one of those risks, because when you're contributing liquidity to a pool, you're contributing it in the token you want to add liquidity to, and also the stable token, right? So you're not having to speculate on two volatile assets when you're contributing liquidity to a pool.
So can you give me a quick example of what, like just an example of one of these pools, like a stable coin that's not DAI, a different type of stable coin?
Yeah, sure.
So what would be the other asset too?
Yeah, so what Bancor has done is we've created a stable version of BNT, right? So it's called USDB, and it's backed by BNT. We used a really cool protocol called the PEG protocol. We gave them a developer grant to essentially build the stable version of BNT. And what this allows is for a liquidity provider to, say, create a pool that is USDB and DAI. So when someone is adding liquidity to that pool, they're adding it in one part USDB, 50% USDB, and 50% DAI. And so because USDB, which is pegged to the price of $1, and DAI is pegged to the price of $1, there'll be very little divergence in their prices, and which means there'll be no impermanent loss. So as a liquidity provider, you're just collecting the fees from conversions that occur on the pool. And then if you think of Uniswap, right? So Uniswap currently uses Ethereum as the base token, the reserve currency for all pools on its system. And it said in V2 that it's going to use DAI as, you can basically do ERC20 to any ERC20. So you can create a pool with any two assets. And it's likely that the DAI-based assets will be quite popular, and stable to stable assets will be quite popular. That's not currently possible in Uniswap. It is currently possible in Bancor. We're ahead there. And essentially what we're seeing people doing on our system right now are creating these stable to stable pools. So USDB and DAI, or USDB and USDT, Tether, or any of the sort of stable tokens out there. And then we're seeing liquidity providers add liquidity to those pools, and they're not seeing any impermanent loss. They're just seeing a return through the fees that are generated from conversion volume.
Sure.
And so does that make sense?
Yeah, so that makes sense to me as far as if you're providing two stable value assets, you're really only going to experience a gain because you're going to receive the fees for those swaps. And I shared with you the first time we spoke, Nate, that I have a Uniswap liquidity pool, or I provided some liquidity in Ethereum and DAI. Or no, I provided, I think I provided CDAI and Ethereum is what I provided.
Okay.
And once, after maybe a couple of months, I looked at kind of what it would have been worth if I had kept it as it was versus what it was worth today. And I actually went down a few percentage points. It wasn't a crazy amount, but it was going in the opposite direction, right? I took my effort to lose money.
Sure. But again, that's why they refer to that as impermanent loss, right? Because you haven't exited the pool yet, right? And so it's impermanent, but once you exit, if the prices haven't come back to that original ratio, then you're screwed.
I like this. I like this idea. Go ahead.
Impermanent loss turning to permanent, and for most people, it does turn to permanent loss.
I like this idea of impermanent loss because I have all these bags from ICOH, and now I can just think of it as an impermanent loss that they're down 98% of their value.
Yeah, it's kind of like linguistic gymnastics there,
right?
Yeah, but the sort of stable to stable pool really reduces that risk to zero. And then also when you can contribute with one stable and one volatile, you're only speculating on the volatile asset. There could still be divergence, but you're not having to contribute liquidity in two volatile assets.
Sure. So the question I have for you, Nate, is so I understand from the liquidity provider's perspective. So I guess I'm curious, who exactly is swapping for USDB and DAI, or USDB and Tether? Why are people swapping between those assets? And does it actually replace, let's say my end goal is to buy Bancor's token, BNT. I'm assuming I can't buy USDB to get to Bancor's token. I would have to use a pool that has Bancor's token in it, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways to do it, but BNT and USDB is a pool that's set up, so you could buy BNT from that pool.
I see.
And also, all USDB pools are connected to BNT-based pools, right? So it's an extra hop to get from a USDB-based pool to a BNT-based pool, but they're still connected. And those transactions, any token that's integrated on the BNT side is going to be convertible on the USDB side and vice versa. But to answer your question, a lot of the conversion volume, we've just released these, by the way. So this is like few weeks old. We've just had the, ROI tools are getting built right now. I think we just had the Zoom, which is a really cool tool that allows you to track the profitabilities of pools on Bancor and on Uniswap. We just had those hooked up to USDB pools. So we're really excited about that. So people can really start seeing the profitability of these pools and see the power of stablecoin-based liquidity. But we're thinking in the initial stages, a lot of the conversion volume will probably come from people just arbing the pools and arbitrage bots that are taking advantage of these sort of small corrections that need to happen, and as these arbs create conversion volume on the pools, again, all those fees are just going into return for the liquidity.
Sure. Okay.
So it might not necessarily, in the early stages, might not necessarily even be users converting tokens that's going to generate the conversion volume.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about the USDB. Is that redeemable for a certain amount of BNT token in the same way that CDPs work on Maker?
So yeah. So basically, USDB is for the most part very similar to the Maker code. And USDB can be sold and bought either by locking up BNT, so you would be minting USDB, or you can just buy and sell it from a relay on Bancor.network. And also the team behind it is getting it listed on exchanges, so it'll be, you can buy it. You can buy it on those exchanges too.
Okay. But as far as the value backing and the stability, and as far as that goes, like it's backed by BNT.
Correct.
Okay. Cool.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then, my other question for you then is so in the initial incarnation of Bancor and these liquidity pools, you use the BNT token, which is volatile. And so I understand that creates additional and permanent loss because you're matching two volatile assets. And now you're kind of evolving into a system where you have a stable token against a volatile asset. Now, my question for you is, people that originally bought BNT did so because they hoped that the network would continue to grow and that the value of BNT would increase because the network's continuing to grow. Of course, if you're using a stable coin, that's not really the case, probably, because...
So keep in mind that USDB is backed by BNT. So whenever you want to contribute liquidity to a USDB pool or create a USDB pool, you have to mint USDB or buy USDB.
Right.
When you mint USDB, it requires you to lock up BNT. So the more USDB that is created, the more demand you would put on BNT, actually twice the amount of demand because the collateralization in USDB. So it's creating a USDB-based pool would put twice the amount of buying pressure on BNT than creating a BNT pool.
And is USDB, does that mean that USDB has a ratio of 200% collateralization ratio? Is that why you said 2 times?
I think it's around 2. Yeah, I think it's around 200.
Okay. And
I'd have to double check. It might be 150.
Okay. And so that means that people who lock their BNT in order to create USDB, I'm going to mix these up at some point, but I'm doing pretty good so far. I'm impressed with myself.
Yeah.
So people who do that, they are essentially leveraging, their position on BNT so that the change in the value of BNT would affect them even more. Is that the right way of thinking of it? Like they're taking a longer position on BNT?
It's literally the same mechanics of, DAI, Maker, and ETH.
Sure.
USDB, PEG, and BNT, right? So those mechanics are parallel.
Sure. Okay. So this is fascinating.
And listen, I mean, one might ask, why not use DAI instead of USDB? And there's several sort of first off, we may in some future allow you to directly stake DAI in a liquidity pool. That's a possibility, and we're exploring that possibility. But this sort of gets to the question of why use in a liquidity network, which we define as multiple liquidity pools being connected and having a reserve currency that facilitates token-to-token transactions between those pools. Why use a token that is specifically designed for that liquidity network as opposed to ETH or DAI? And we believe that using a token that is specifically designed for the liquidity network allows the holders of that token to more easily make changes to the token as a community, as owners of the network, as owners of the protocol, that specifically benefit decentralized liquidity in the liquidity pools. Mm-hmm. So for instance, and we're actually doing this with BNT, and it could be replicated on USDB, but it's going to come to a vote in the BNT community amongst BNT holders whether to introduce inflation to BNT. And that inflation, if it gets voted on, will fund a treasury. And BNT holders will be able to vote on what happens with that treasury. And what we want to happen, what we expect to happen, is that they can vote to fund specific liquidity pools on Bancor using BNT inflation. So that essentially acts as sort of an airdrop on the liquidity providers on specific pools. So what you're seeing there is BNT holders, the protocol owners, having the flexibility to incentivize specific behaviors on the network that they deem strategic to that network. And you only get this type of control as holders and owners of the protocol through using a platform token. You lose that, you don't have that control, say, and we spoke about this last time, but if I were using ETH or DAI, and I wanted to have my liquidity network vote on inflation and target inflation at specific pools or target it at specific development projects that benefit the protocol, mm-hmm. You would have to go through the respective foundations, the Ethereum Foundation and the Maker Foundation. So this really drives to the heart of the argument of platform tokens, and specifically the utility of platform tokens in liquidity protocols.
Sure, okay. That's interesting to me. I guess I'm curious if you could give me an example of a scenario where it would be important to I guess, subsidize liquidity providers in a certain situation. What is the scenario for that?
So essentially it's an airdrop.
Right, and why would you be airdropping a certain liquidity pool or a certain side of it?
Say you're like long on decentralized insurance protocols. Like what is it? Nexus Mutual, mm-hmm. right? And you think that the Nexus Mutual NXM, the token, is going to rise. The BNT community or whatever community thinks that token is going to rise. You can say this pool is going to start, we think this token is going to go in higher demand. So we want to increase the liquidity of this pool so that there's less slippage and there's a stronger incentive. It's a more attractive place to convert NXM on our protocol. So by directing some of the BNT inflation to the NXM pool, it increases the liquidity depth, which decreases the user slippage. And this is why any exchange or any liquidity protocol is attractive, because it has more or less slippage. Slippage is bad for traders.
Sure.
So I'm going to direct this month's BNT inflation, or the community decides they vote. I'm going to direct this month's BNT inflation to the NXM pool, and I'm going to take advantage of this rising demand for NXM, and it's going to drive more conversions on this pool, and that's going to improve the situation for the liquidity providers, because remember, they're getting fees off the conversions, and it's going to drive more volume and usage of the network, which benefits the BNT holders. So essentially what you're doing, and this is so key to crypto networks going forward, It's to align the incentives of the protocol owners with the users. In this case, align the incentive of BNT holders with its users who are liquidity providers, right?
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So this kind of flexibility and control, in the case of liquidity protocols, you need a platform level token. Now, a lot of folks are probably familiar, maybe if you're like geek out on this, if you geek out on, liquidity protocols and liquidity pools, you're probably familiar with the really interesting liquidity provider incentive program that Synthetics set up with Uniswap. Are you familiar with that? Maybe I can explain it to your audience.
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm not familiar specifically.
We've had some projects do this on Bancor too. But essentially what Synthetics did on Uniswap is it created a synthetic ETH and ETH pool. That pool is now the largest and most lucrative on Uniswap, right? And it said, if you are a liquidity provider on this pool, we know your wallet address because, just like Bancor, the liquidity provider is totally open source and you can see it on the blockchain. We have your wallet address. So if you're a liquidity provider, which means you're providing, liquidity to this pool, we're going to airdrop SNX tokens on you I think it's every week or every month. Might be every month. So they're incentivizing people to provide liquidity to their pool.
Got it.
And it also acts as like a cool onboarding mechanism for their users, right? Like, hey, invest in this cool DeFi instrument. It's the most lucrative pool on Uniswap. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, you'll just have our tokens land in your wallet.
Sure.
Okay, so this is something we've started to see replicated and we've seen for a little bit on Bancor, right? That we push some projects that have listed their tokens on Bancor. We're saying you have their wallet addresses. You should start giving them rewards, incentivize them to be liquidity providers on your pool. So having team incentivized liquidity provider programs is awesome. But what we think is equally, if not more powerful, is protocol level liquidity provider incentives.
Sure.
And that's what I've described through the BNT inflation, the treasury, and BNT holders being able to direct that inflation and provide those rewards at the protocol level. So sure. you have the protocol level and also the team level. And you need a platform token to do that. Uniswap would not be able to provide easily, on the thought of my head, these sort of protocol level liquidity provider incentives.
Sure, and so when you explained that, my first thought was like, well, why do we need a protocol token if Synthetics can do it from, with Uniswap? But I understand the incentives aren't the same. Like Synthetics has a specific goal in mind, but they might not be consistent, or there might be missed opportunities that Bancor's system would capture to provide a better service to liquidity providers and traders. On the protocol level. So I'm excited to see.
SNX have no sort of holders have no allegiance to specifically to Uniswap.
Sure,
right?
Of course, right. No,
absolutely.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
You don't have that overlap there of the tokens are just different. You don't have the protocol.
Sure.
The holders and the liquidity providers incentives aligned. And they're just two.
I like that Bancor has that thesis, and I think it's going to be something that's going to be tested. As we move into the future and we see kind of which stand out and kind of what scenarios maybe need that protocol level incentive system built in. I'm personally a big fan of trading on liquidity. On liquidity pool trading versus order book trading, just from a user experience perspective. I appreciate the experience a lot better. So it sounded like you had something else to add, but I did want to ask you to also mention kind of what the airdrop was with BNT holders. I know there's something coming up. So
perfect segue, because essentially we're talking about sort of, why have a token? What sort of interesting things can a protocol do to specifically a liquidity protocol, right? And these didn't exist until people didn't start using this lingo until recently. But Bancor was, you could say, one of the first, not the first liquidity protocol. Uniswap is a liquidity protocol. But what interesting things can you do when there's actually a token in the liquidity protocol, right? And in the airdrop is sort of a macro. Our upcoming airdrop, Bancor's, sort of a macro example of something really cool you can do that sort of aligns your holders with your users. Again, BNT holders with liquidity providers. Essentially what we are doing is there's about 60,000 plus, close to 70,000 people holding BNT, right? What we're gonna do, and I guess right now there's probably around 200 liquidity providers, LPs, on using the Bancor protocol. So providing liquidity to an existing token liquidity pool on Bancor. We're gonna turn every BNT holder into a liquidity provider on the protocol by airdropping BNT ETH, which is the pool token of the BNT ETH liquidity pool on Bancor, so that every recipient of this airdrop will collect conversion fees, trading fees, from every ETH conversion on the Bancor network. So what we've done is we've turned every protocol owner, every BNT holder into a liquidity provider. Right now, around 200 liquidity providers on Bancor. I think a little less on Uniswap. I don't know how many liquidity providers let's say there's like, in all of DeFi, maybe 1,000. That seems really high.
Right.
Basically, overnight, through this airdrop, we've created roughly 60,000 more people that are liquidity providers without them taking any action. All they have to do is hold BNT in their wallet at the time of the BNT snapshot, which is happening in December. We're going to announce the date soon. And we've created 60,000 new liquidity providers to this, for this new DeFi primitive.
Okay.
And our goal, go ahead.
Let me stop you there for just a second to make sure that everyone understands how this works. So the way that it works with Uniswap, for example, is when I put in my my CDAI and my ETH, I actually receive a Uniswap token, and I'm holding that in my wallet, and that represents a small portion of that pool of those assets. And so what I understand Bancor is probably doing is pushing a bunch of ETH into a pool, providing the ETH onto the pool, and then giving everyone one of these tokens that represents a piece of that pool. And so they could, after they receive that, they're a liquidity provider by default. They could go in and withdraw their corresponding funds. But if they don't, they're a liquidity provider, and they're also going to be receiving the benefits of the trades. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, perfect. They could withdraw it by just selling it. Uniswap calls them pool tokens.
Right.
We call them relay tokens. So it's a relay token called BNT ETH that will appear in their wallet. They could just sell it back. They could hold on to it and collect the fees, or they could move it and sell it for a different relay token to allow them to become to a liquidity provider on a different pool on the network. So really, we want to give the world a taste of what it feels like to own a pair on an exchange, to own a pro rata share of a pair on an exchange, to be the exchange. And we hope that once the world gets a sort of taste of this, that it will change exchanges for forever. Any exchange that doesn't have 1,000 liquidity providers in the future, we hope will, not exist, or because exchanges should be owned by the public. They should be owned. These should be owned by the people, right? It shouldn't be one group that collects trading fees. It should be thousands of people that collect trading fees, and all they have to do is just store their, store their idle assets, hopefully without permanent loss. Right?
Yeah, I like that, Nate. I hadn't really thought of it in that perspective of people owning the exchanges, and I also like this thinking about of basically putting it in people's hands so that they're then sort of converted. You know, I can imagine a certain number of people will have BNT tokens and maybe not be paying attention, and then later find out they have this thing and look it up, and maybe it's 6 months later and they realize, oh, it's gone up, you know, X number of dollars or X number of ETH because I was receiving these fees, and then they're incentivized to learn how it works. And yeah, it seems like a major jump. So I get that.
Yeah, listen, if we can educate like 10% of those people, 6,000 people, you know, then we will have done something huge, right?
Sure.
That's my goal. 10% of the recipients of this relay token, pool token, understand what the hell is going on.
Right.
That would be amazing for me.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's seems like a reasonable percentage of those people.
So again, the way and that's a protocol level liquidity provider, you know, incentive mechanism, right? It's being delivered by the protocol. It requires but it's much easier to do with a platform token.
Sure.
And yeah, in order to receive this, we call it a relay token, pool token, BNT ETH, all you need to do is hold BNT by when the BNT snapshot happens. That's happening in December.
Mm-hmm.
And so we recommend you hold it in a non-custodial wallet. We're going to be announcing a couple exchanges where you will also receive the airdrop if you hold BNT on those exchanges.
Okay.
So keep an eye out for that.
Right.
And yeah, you know, this is a little technical, but essentially BNT is shifting from a dynamic supply token to a fixed supply token, right? This is going to get like really annoyingly complicated, but essentially BNT existed as what we call a liquid token that could print and destroy itself by sending directly to the smart contract.
Mm-hmm.
And we're changing it into just a regular ERC20 token and sticking it in a liquidity pool with Ethereum, right?
I see.
And what we're giving to the public is essentially what existed as this Ethereum reserve in the liquid token. That's essentially what's being airdropped on BNT holders in the form of BNT ETH.
I see. Yep.
Really annoyingly complicated, but all you need to know is just hold BNT. By the time of the snapshot, you will become a liquidity provider and can get a taste, if you haven't already, for what it's like to own a pro rata share of an exchange pair.
Okay, nice. I think that's a very comprehensive explanation of what's coming up. Yeah, so I look forward to hanging out in DeFi Nation, and you know, I'll definitely tag you when people are asking questions, because like I said, there's people in that group who are very interested in what Bancor's up to and how it works, and yeah. So I think we're about out of time, but is there anything else that you want people to walk away from this video?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're here to answer questions as a lot of these changes go through. We have a really sort of emerging, fast growing developer ecosystem. That a big part of this announcement was that Bancor is starting to give away more and more developer grants. So if you think you have an idea that can build on liquidity pools, we want to hear it, because you could be up for funding from the foundation. We have a developer channel, Bancor Developers, on Telegram, where there's a really always cool conversations going on about these topics. So hop in there, propose some ideas, apply for a grant. You know, we're here to help, and we're excited for what happens.
Nice. I like hearing that. And there's actually someone in particular in our group that I think will probably be very interested in that opportunity. Nice. So I'll make sure to point it out to him.
All right, amazing.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Nate. Really appreciate the update, and look forward to watching how everything goes down.
Thank you, Clayton. Really appreciate it.
All right. Cheers. Take care.